The sound wasn't just metal, it was arrogance meeting gravity. When my 80,000-pound logging truck rolled over her pristine white Tesla, the air filled with the kind of silence that follows justice finally catching up. My name's Marcus Turner, I'm 47, and I own a small logging company tucked beside a private road just outside Whispering Pines HOA. For 12 peaceful years, I lived quietly until Karen Patterson, the self-crowned queen of the cul-de-sac, decided my gate was her personal parking spot. That morning, as the sun rose behind the pines, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. Months of warnings, letters, and patience had led to this moment, a moment both inevitable and completely legal. So when the crunch echoed across the valley, I simply smiled and said to myself, that's the sound of consequences. Before I tell you how a $95,000 Tesla became a pancake drop, a comment below tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you enjoy seeing karma roll on 18 wheels, hit that subscribe button because this one's just getting started. If you'd told me a year ago that a luxury SUV and a woman named Karen would test my patience more than 30 years in the logging business, I would have laughed. I've dealt with falling trees, frozen roads, and mechanical failures that could kill a man in seconds, but nothing prepared me for the psychological warfare of suburban entitlement. My name's Marcus Turner, and for 12 years I'd called the edge of Whispering Pines home. 15 acres of forested land tucked behind an iron gate with my house at the top of a gravel driveway that wound through rows of Douglas fir and cedar. The road connecting my gate to the main highway wasn't part of the HOA, it was mine. Deeded, maintained, and paid for entirely by me. I'd even posted 3 metal signs along the fence line, "Private road, no parking trespassers will be towed." For over a decade, nobody had ever tested that rule. The residents of Whispering Pines mostly kept to themselves. They waved politely when I drove by in my pickup, sometimes ordered firewood from my yard, and pretended not to notice the scent of diesel that clung to my clothes. It was peaceful, predictable, and quiet. Then came Brenda Karen Patterson. She moved in 6 months ago, right into the biggest house near the cul-de-sac entrance, a $1.2 million monument to self-importance. Her husband, Doug Patterson, was supposedly a lawyer, though that turned out to be more of a creative resume choice. He was a corporate tax accountant for an HVAC company in town. Karen, however, introduced herself as if she were running for office. The first time I met her, she didn't even say hello. She just waved at me from her driveway while holding her phone like she was taking inventory of the neighborhood peasants. The second time I saw her was the start of it all. I was heading home one Tuesday afternoon when I noticed a white Tesla Model X parked right in front of my gate. Its sleek curves gleamed under the sun, blocking my only access in or out. The car's license plate frame read, "Zero Emissions Infinite Entitlement." I honked once. No response. Twice. Nothing. I parked my truck and got out. A woman in designer athleisure, tight black leggings, neon pink sneakers, oversized sunglasses, walked up the hill carrying a yoga mat. "Excuse me," I called out. "Is this your car?" She smiled like I'd complimented her. "Yes, it's mine. I'll just be a minute." "I have yoga at the clubhouse." I gestured to the heavy iron gate behind her. "You're blocking my driveway." Her tone changed immediately, syrupy politeness giving way to annoyance. "This is community property, isn't it?" I pointed to the sign. "Private road. My property. The deed's on record at the county office." Karen crossed her arms. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. The HOA maintains this stretch." "No, ma'am," I said evenly. "I do. Always have. You can check the tax parcel maps if you'd like." She huffed. "I'm sure we'll sort this out. I'll move it when I'm done." Then she turned her back and walked off toward the clubhouse, leaving her car exactly where it was. That was day one. I waited an hour. She didn't come back. Finally, I called the local towing company, but the dispatcher told me, if she's a resident and claims it's HOA property, we'll need proof before we touch it. By the time Karen returned, sweat-drenched from yoga and smug as a cat, my patience had already been tested. I left a note, I told her. She slid into the Tesla. "Oh, I saw it." I threw it away. Then with a half-smile, she said something I'll never forget. "You shouldn't hoard public access, Marcus. That's not very neighborly." The next day I found a paper folded under my gate latch. It looked official, HOA letterhead, a gold-embossed logo, and her signature scrawled at the bottom. The violation notice claimed my gate violated community accessibility standards and that I faced a fine of $250 for restricting shared roadway access. I laughed out loud. My land wasn't even part of Whispering Pines. The HOA had no authority here. Still, something about that paper got under my skin. It wasn't the fake fine, it was the arrogance behind it. By the end of the week, she'd parked in front of my gate 2 more times. Once just to run into town, another time for her wellness luncheon. Every time she refused to move when asked. "I'm vice president of the HOA," she'd say, flashing her badge like it was a sheriff's star. "You can't threaten me on shared property." I started photographing everything: time, date, position of her car, even the tire marks on the gravel. When I emailed the HOA board about it, I got a reply 2 days later. It read, "Thank you for your concern. After review, the board has determined that Mrs. Patterson's use of the access road falls within reasonable community activity." I stared at that email for a long time. Reasonable activity apparently now included trespassing. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the message. She wanted control. She wanted to prove that even outside her little HOA bubble, her rules still ruled. The next week I installed 2 more signs, big, reflective, impossible to miss. The day after, I found one of them spray painted over with the words HOA access only. It was becoming war by inches. I decided to stay calm, always calm. I wasn't going to let some self-righteous suburban monarch drag me down to her level. I kept my head down, went to work, and tried to ignore it. But then she escalated. One Saturday morning, my driver radioed in, "Marcus, we can't get through. There's a car blocking the gate again." I already knew whose it was. By the time I got there, Karen was standing in front of her Tesla with her arms crossed, recording everything on her phone. "Move your car," I said, stepping out of my truck. She smirked. "Smile, you're on HOA camera." "This isn't a joke, Karen. You're harassing me," she said. "I'll be reporting this to the board." "That's fine," I said, walking back to my cab. "Make sure you mention the $3,500 I just lost, because my delivery truck couldn't get through." That wiped the smirk off her face for about 2 seconds. Then she said, "Maybe you should have been more neighborly." That's when I realized something about people like her. They don't just want to win, they want to humiliate you. Later that night, I called my buddy Tom, an attorney I'd known since high school. I told him everything. He chuckled darkly. "Classic HOA power trip. Document everything. Photos, letters, timestamps. You'll need it later. What about those fake fines she's sending if she's issuing them on property not under HOA jurisdiction?" Tom said. "That's fraud. But don't confront her yet. Stay clean. Stay patient." Patience was my specialty. Logging teaches you that timber doesn't fall the second you swing the axe. You line up the cut, you measure the angle, and when the time's right, you let gravity do the rest. At that point, I didn't know just how far Karen would go or how much she'd underestimate me. But I did know this. She'd already dug herself into the roots of my property. And soon enough, she was going to hear the sound of those roots breaking. By month 2, dealing with Karen had become a part-time job, unpaid, unpleasant, and impossible to quit. Every time I thought she couldn't get any more brazen, she found a new way to test the limits of both property law and human patience. It started small. She'd accidentally park her Tesla half a foot into my driveway, claiming it was too tight a turn otherwise. Then she'd inch closer. Eventually, her rear bumper was practically kissing my gate. Every time I confronted her, she'd flash that same saccharine smile and say, "Relax, Marcus, we're all neighbors here." Neighbors don't spray paint over your signs, though. After I put up 2 new reflective private property no parking signs, I found them the next morning covered in neon pink graffiti HOA road. The spray paint dripped like a signature. I sent the photos to the HOA board. 3 days later, they replied with a single sentence: "We will remind residents to be respectful of shared spaces." Shared spaces. They kept using that phrase like it erased deeds, property lines, and logic itself. I tried to talk sense into Karen one last time, face to face. "Karen," I said, standing by her car one Thursday afternoon, "you're trespassing every time you park here." The sheriff's department already confirmed this is private property. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, the sheriff doesn't understand our community's easement rules. The HOA has jurisdiction." "No, it doesn't. You can't make up jurisdiction." She laughed, twirling her car keys. "Watch me." That's when I knew logic wasn't going to work. The real turning point came 2 weeks later when my delivery schedule collided head-on with her ego. One of my biggest clients, a furniture manufacturer from Portland, had ordered a large batch of Kyline dried Douglas fir. I had a truck loaded and ready worth nearly $25, 0 inches lumber. My driver called me at 7:30 a.m. "Boss," he said nervously, "we can't get through. That white Tesla's back again." I felt my blood pressure spike. "You've got to be kidding." "No, sir. It's right across the gate." I drove down there myself. Sure enough, there it was. Brilliant white, polished, parked dead center, blocking the entrance like it owned the land. The sunlight glinted off the Tesla's surface as if to mock me. Karen wasn't anywhere in sight. I called her cell. Straight to voicemail. I called the HOA office. They said Mrs. Patterson is currently unavailable but will forward your message. My driver was losing hours. My lumber sat idle. Every passing minute was lost income. I took photos, time-stamped everything, and sent them to my attorney friend Tom. He replied within 5 minutes, keep documenting. Don't touch the car, don't even move it. The pattern matters more than the incident. So I waited. Karen finally appeared around noon, carrying a smoothie and wearing her oversized sunglasses like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. Hey neighbor, she chirped. Hope you don't mind, I was just catching up with a friend. You cost me $3.500 today, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked me dead in the eye and said, maybe you should plan better. Then she got in her Tesla, reversed, and drove off like nothing happened. That was the moment the switch flipped inside me. I'd spent my whole life solving problems with work, patience, and common sense, but Karen didn't operate in that world. She thrived on manipulation, bureaucracy, and the belief that she was untouchable because she could shout HOA louder than anyone else. That night, I made a folder on my desktop titled HOA Nonsense. Inside it, I saved every photo, every email, every timestamp. I even bought a dash camera to record her car each time it blocked my gate. Within weeks, I had over 50 separate incidents documented enough to build a small courtroom drama. And then I found something even worse. While checking my mail one afternoon, I received a letter from a title agency. It mentioned outstanding HOA dues attached to my property. I almost laughed. My property wasn't even inside the HOA boundaries. But when I called to clarify, they sent me a scanned notice of lien that Karen had filed through the HOA system. The document listed my property's parcel number along with her signature as HOA vice president. It demanded $900 in back dues for maintenance of shared access road. She had fabricated a lien. On private land, I forwarded it to Tom, who called me immediately. Marcus, that's fraud. Plain and simple. But don't confront her yet. Let's get it on record first. We filed a complaint with the county clerk's office and sent a formal cease and desist letter through Tom's firm. It was clean, professional, and entirely legal. A week later, I found a new violation notice taped to my mailbox. This one accused me of unauthorized commercial activity and disrupting community peace. I realized she was doubling down, using the HOA as her personal weapon. The lies spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who once waved now turned away. Some whispered when I passed. I overheard one woman at the gas station saying, "Isn't he the guy running that illegal lumber operation?" It didn't matter that my business was licensed, insured, and operating miles from HOA land. Karen's gossip had done its job. One evening, I caught her standing by the gate with another board member, pointing and laughing while they took pictures of my truck tires. When I approached, she called out, "We're just collecting evidence of your environmental damage," I wanted to yell. I wanted to let every ounce of frustration spill out, but instead I just said, "Keep filming, Karen. You'll need the footage soon." She blinked, uncertain whether it was a threat or a promise. That night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the mountain of evidence I'd collected: photos, videos, emails, audio clips. It was enough to bury her in paperwork, but Tom's words echoed in my head. By the book, Marcus. Everything by the book. So I stayed patient. I filed reports. I documented every new trespass. I called the sheriff's office again, and the deputy confirmed, yes, it's private property. Yes, she's trespassing. But since it's a civil matter, they couldn't tow her car without a court order. A court order takes months. Meanwhile, she parked there almost daily, as if daring me to react. She even started using my gate as her personal stage, chatting on her phone, filming TikToks about entitled men harassing women. I found one clip online where she stood in front of my property saying, "Some people think owning a truck gives them authority. Well, not in Whispering Pines." The comments were full of support from strangers who had no idea what she was actually doing. The longer it went on, the more I felt something boiling deep inside, a mixture of helplessness and clarity. She wasn't going to stop until something forced her to. The breaking point came late one afternoon when I drove home and saw my mailbox smashed in. Sitting on top of it was a crumpled copy of my cease and desist letter, scrawled over in red marker, "You don't own this road." That's when I decided the time for diplomacy was over. I wasn't going to scream or vandalize or stoop to her level. I was going to use the one thing Karen didn't understand: leverage and law. I called Tom again. "You said to do everything by the book, right? Right. Well, I said it's time to turn the page." Tom chuckled. "What are you thinking? Something that'll make sure she never parks on my property again." There was a pause. Then he said, "Just make sure it's legal." "Oh, it will be," I promised. "Perfectly legal." As I hung up, I looked out my window toward the gate where her white Tesla glowed under the porch light like a trophy she didn't deserve. I didn't know it yet, but I'd just started planning the most satisfying day of my life, one that would end with the crunch of metal, the gasp of a shocked crowd, and the most poetic case of karma I'd ever seen. By the time October rolled in, Karen had turned my driveway into her personal staging ground. What started as a single, arrogant park job had metastasized into a full-blown territorial campaign. She wasn't just parking in front of my gate anymore, she was holding court. Friends, neighbors, and whatever allies she'd recruited would show up on purpose, block the entrance in a neat little cluster, and act as if they'd discovered some civic duty. They'd sit on folding chairs, sip iced lattes, and take turns filming me like I was some dangerous exhibit at a zoo. One morning I came out to find 3 cars lined up shoulder to shoulder in front of my gate, umbrellas propped like parasols, and a little speaker playing meditative music. Karen waved at me like she'd invited me to her picnic. A woman I didn't know called out, "We're protesting diesel trucks in our neighborhood," as though unloading 20 tons of timber was a public health crisis. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so costly. That week alone, I had 3 scheduled hauls that had to be rerouted. Drivers sat on the shoulder with engines idling the clock, eating my profit margin. Clients called frustrated. "When will you be able to deliver?" they asked. I had to explain politely, because my reputation relied on calm professionalism, that an HOA vice president's parking habits had cost me the day. Judging by the sympathetic silence on the other end of the line, my explanations weren't doing much to soothe empty invoice columns. She wasn't subtle with her theatrics either. One Saturday, she rolled up in a white convertible and organized a community beautification brunch at the mouth of my driveway. They laid out tiny sandwiches and flyers about respecting communal access. At the center of their little setup sat Karen's Tesla shining like an altarpiece. I couldn't tell if I should laugh or file a restraining order. As if the constant blocking weren't enough, Karen took to weaponizing paperwork. She mailed a stream of complaints to county offices, false, verbose, and signed with a flourish claiming noise dust and unauthorized commercial activity. She copied the HOA neighbors and a local news outlet she'd befriended through a volunteer position. The letters were full of legal-sounding jargon. She used phrases like community easement and shared access rights with the confidence of someone who'd read a paragraph on a blog and decided it was gospel. Then she escalated where it hurt reputation. A few neighbors I'd known for years began treating me like someone to avoid. Conversations went cold when I passed them. It wasn't just that Karen had influence. She cultivated fear. People didn't want headaches, and an angry HOA vice president who could make life uncomfortable was a headache they preferred to avoid. I'd been a friendly face at holiday gatherings and a reliable resource for firewood, but suddenly I was the man with the noisy trucks and the uncultured property. It stung more than it should have, mostly because of how unfair it was. Things finally broke on the day my mother came to visit. My mother is 80 this year, proud, stubborn, and the only person who'll tell me when my shirts don't match. Her knees are brittle, and she uses a little folding walker. We'd planned a quiet weekend together, a birthday lunch at the county diner, a walk through the pines, her favorite pie. I'd called ahead, arranged the whole thing. I wanted her to park close to the gate for a shorter walk. It's the least I could do for her. We arrived 10 minutes early. The sun was warm, the kind of forgiving October light that makes everything look nostalgic. But when I pulled up to unlock the gate there, it was Karen's Tesla right in the center rear bumper, inches from my latch like a barb. She wasn't there. I peered down the road. The clubhouse kids were doing yoga. I checked my phone. No missed calls from Karen. No polite text saying she'd be gone in a sec. My mother climbed out slowly and leaned on my arm. I could see confusion flash across her face. "Is this where we're supposed to go?" she asked, glancing at the cars and the umbrellas, the small crowd taking selfies. I told her it would be fine, that I'd move things, that we'd get through somehow. 4 hours later, we were still circling the diner parking lot. I called the HOA. "This is private property," I said to the woman who answered. "She's blocking my gate." "We consider that stretch to be under HOA review," she replied in that flat bureaucratic tone that meant the responsibility was someone else's. "You'll have to pursue this as a civil matter." I called the local non-emergency police line and asked them to come document the trespass. The officer who arrived was courteous, sympathetic, and blunt. "Sir," he said, looking at the photographs on my phone, "if this is your private property, you're correct. We can file a report, but towing requires either a court order or the owner's consent. It's a civil problem unless there's imminent danger." I explained that my elderly mother was waiting in discomfort, and that the towing company's ETA was 4 to 6 hours. The officer rubbed his forehead and said the same thing. Civil matter. So my mother sat in the car, her walker folded on the seat beside her, and she waited while Karen did errands, drank her coffee, and went to her wellness luncheon. I watched the hours tick by like small, cruel knives. Each minute felt like a judgment. My mother's smile faded. When she finally managed the short walk to my house hours later, she was pale and exhausted. That image, her hunched shoulders, the tiredness in her eyes, stayed with me long after the cold coffee had been thrown out. It wasn't just the logistics or the lost income anymore, it was the cruelty of it. Some people hide cruelty behind rules and community, but make no mistake, blocking your gate while your elderly parent struggles to find a place to sit is cruelty designed to assert dominance. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was exercising power. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, replaying the day, running through every bureaucratic avenue I'd already tried. Warnings had been ignored. The HOA had defended her. The sheriff's hands were tied. The towing companies were slow or scared of getting dragged into HOA politics. My folder of documentation sat on the kitchen table like a challenge. I called Tom after midnight. "You were right," I admitted when he picked up. "This isn't about parking. It's about her needing to humiliate me." Tom was silent for a beat. "So do something that humiliates her back," he said plainly. "But do it by the book." By the book, I echoed. We made a checklist, certified notices, visible signage, a public record, a pre-announced legitimate commercial operation scheduled to use the route, cameras pointed at the gate recording in high resolution with timestamps. Witnesses lined up, drivers, neighbors who'd been quietly inconvenienced, even the towing company who'd quoted that 4 to 6 hour window. Tom made sure every step I took would create an impenetrable paper trail. "Make sure it's bulletproof," he said. "No vigilante stuff, no theatrics that can be spun into aggression. Let the law be the hammer." The plan began to look less like revenge and more like strategy. It would take patience, timing, and absolute discipline to keep everything legal. But it would also take the one thing Karen never seemed to understand: consequences. When we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window looking toward the gate where, for the first time in months, the headlights of my own truck glowed like a promise. I sipped the bitter coffee I'd forgotten on the counter and felt a calm settle over me. A dangerous kind of calm, the kind I get when I'm about to fell a tree. I've sized up for hours. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolute. And I was finally ready to stop waiting for someone else to fix it. Tom's voice on the phone had a way of slicing through the fog. "Document everything. Make it undeniable. If you're going to make a point, do it so cleanly that the only story left for people is the truth." He wasn't cheering for violence or spectacle. He was pitching me a legal blueprint, warnings, records, witnesses, and a legitimate business purpose. In short, build the circumstance so precisely that any fallout would be hers and hers alone. So I began like any good logger begins a job, with measurements, not fury. First, I audited every inch of paper I owned about the property: the deed, the survey maps, tax records, the maintenance receipts for the road, the insurance policies for the business, and the permitting history for the timber operations. Everything matched up. The road was mine on paper and in practice. I'd been maintaining it, grading it, and paying to keep it passable for years. That was my anchor. Next came the public notice. I didn't like theatrics, but I wasn't going to whisper and hope she listened. I hired the county courier and had Tom draft a certified letter addressed to Karen Patterson. It was short, clinical, and unmistakable. "Dear Miss Patterson, please be advised that commercial logging traffic will be operating on the private access road serving parcel XXXXX beginning Monday 6:00 a.m. All vehicles obstructing the access will be considered abandoned if they prevent legitimate business passage. This notice constitutes formal warning in accordance with property rights and local ordinance. Sincerely, Marcus Turner." Tom reviewed and stamped it, and I watched the courier hand it to her on a Friday afternoon. The receipt came back with a proud little barcode and a signature I could recognize even if it was a flourish. The legal box was checked. Then I posted the signs. Not sneaky ones, not the little laminated pieces some folks slap up and call authority. These were professional-grade weatherproof signs, bright, reflective, and specific. 24 inches wide, bold lettering: private road, commercial logging activity, no parking 5/9, 5/16, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. I anchored them on heavy posts and placed them not once, but at 3 visibility points directly at my gate, halfway down the lane, and at the turn approaching the cul-de-sac. They read like a warning. They looked permanent enough to make someone think twice. I also placed smaller placards with precise timestamps: notice posted 72 hours before operation. That was deliberate. If anyone tried to claim surprise or ignorance, the timestamps would say otherwise. Cameras were the next chapter. I retrofitted my existing system with 2 more high-res motion sensors, one facing the gate dead-on, another covering the road approach. These weren't the grainy apologetic black boxes you see in cheap setups. They recorded at 60 frames per second, timestamp locked and uploaded to a secure cloud drive automatically. Every car that slowed, every person who lingered, every second of indecision would be captured in crisp, undeniable detail. I informed the HOA board formally. No lecturing, no baiting, just facts, dates, times, and the legal rationale. I sent copies of the certified letter to their secretary and made sure the county clerk had a recorded copy too. The goal was not to antagonize them, it was to create an official paper trail showing I'd done everything reasonable to give notice. Then, there was the human element. I told my drivers one by one exactly what to expect and what to record. I scheduled the timber load legitimately, no fluff, no show. A buyer in town had contracted a delivery for a mill that morning, and the manifest sat on my desk. The Kenworth was serviced, weighed, and inspected. I checked the brakes myself. I told the driver Pete that if anything went sideways, he was to stop, radio me, and follow the plan. Every man in my crew knew this wasn't a stunt, it was business with a deadline. I left voicemails too soft but official. "Karen," I said in one, leaning against the hood of my truck so the words came steady and normal. "This is Marcus Turner. This is your final warning. Commercial logging traffic begins Monday at 6 a.m. For your safety, and to avoid damage to your vehicle, please do not park in front of the gate. Thanks." The message timestamped itself. I kept the recording. There was a strange satisfaction in the mundane parts, printing manifests, tightening bolts, putting the manifest in the glove box. It felt almost surgical, cold, efficient, and entirely controlled. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted a mirror. I wanted the consequences to reflect back on the person who chose to ignore the signs and letters. If she parked there after every warning, after official notice, after cameras and certified mail, then whatever happened would be the direct result of her choices. My neighbors started to notice too. A few came by curious and cautious, and I walked them through the evidence like a doctor explaining x-rays. I showed them the certified mail receipts, the sign locations, the time-stamped photos for the past months. Some nodded quietly. Others shook their heads embarrassed about how quickly they'd let their opinions be swayed by rumors. A woman named Lisa, who'd previously avoided me at holiday parties, told me quietly we didn't know she'd been doing this to so many people. That kind of admission was worth more than 1,000 angry words. Tom and I double-checked everything. "If she parks there," he said, "and you have a legitimate conveyance and documentation, you won't be the aggressor. You'll be the business owner exercising a lawful right to access property you own. If anyone asks you, followed the book. No improvisation, no theatrics." I couldn't help but think of the timber itself as an instrument of law, rather than revenge. The weight of the cargo was simply the physical representation of a legal right. I knew the physics. An 80,000 pound loaded truck carries momentum that a 5,000 pound car cannot resist. But it wasn't the momentum I relied on, it was the prior notice, the legal documentation, the witnesses, and the record. If consequences were to befall the car, the world would see that the owner had been warned, and that the owner had chosen to ignore those warnings. Sunday night, I slept badly. Not because I feared legal consequences, I trusted the documentation, but because of the moral vector the situation had taken. I had never wanted to hurt anyone. My life had been about building things, roads, livelihoods, and sometimes even community. But I also knew this, continuing to be passive, would only encourage more abuse. Some people needed rules to be reinforced with an immovable object they could bully away. Karen had created a pattern of entitlement, and patterns only stop when someone breaks them. At 4:30 a.m. on Monday, my phone buzzed with a final message from Tom. "You've done the work. Stick to the plan. Don't deviate." I drove to the yard in the dark and watched the sky lighten over the tree line. The Kenworth glowed like a beast ready to move. My crew was already there, faces pale with focus. The signs gleamed in the pre-dawn light. Cameras hummed quietly. When the clock rolled to 6:00, everything I had prepared sat in its place. Legal notices, filed signs, posted cameras, rolling witnesses, briefed a bona fide business load manifest in the glove box. There was no grandstanding, no smug delight, only the slow, inevitable approach of a man doing his job on his own land, and the knowledge that now at last the situation would be resolved in a language Karen would understand, consequences, measured and lawful. I woke before dawn with the kind of calm that isn't peace so much as readiness. The kitchen clock read 4:02 a.m. when I made coffee. the house quietly settling into the long breath before a morning. Outside, the road was black as pitch, the pines swallowing sound. I checked the cloud backup on my phone, camera feeds were green and recording timestamps. Steady 0512, 0513, 0514. The certified letter receipt sat on the table beside my mug like a witness sign stamped undeniable. I felt the weight of every carefully logged detail, and for the first time in months, that weight felt like a shield instead of a burden. At 5:45 a.m., I drove down to the gate in my pickup to do a final sweep. The Tesla was there, white as always, its silhouette oddly elegant against the low light. Someone had put a little tree-shaped air freshener on the mirror comedy in the face of logistics. Karen's car was parked exactly where she'd been parking for months, dead center, twice the distance from the shoulder, as a courtesy required, as if to announce I belong here. I called her cell. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message that was short and flat. Karen, this is Marcus. Commercial logging traffic begins at 6:00 a.m. today. Move your vehicle now to avoid damage. This is your final warning. The phone showed the timestamp when the message sent 0547. The sheriff's office had already been copied on the chain of emails. I had the deputy's name in my notes. I sent him a quick text. On scene before 6, cameras recording. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and said he'd swing by to observe. That was all I needed from the county documented presence, not intervention. The Kenworth rolled up precisely at 0603. It looked enormous in the dim light headlights, like two low moons, the trailer stacked and secured with 40,000 pounds of Douglas fir that smelled of sap and labor. I climbed into the cab, the seat settling under me like an old friend, and revved the engine gently. The air horn breathed. It was a low, honest sound that belonged to work and not to drama. Pete, my driver, tapped the mic and said, "We're go, Marcus." I thumbed my headset and confirmed, voice steady, "Follow my lead." Cameras on manifest and glove box. If she moves, stop. If she doesn't, proceed slowly. No sudden maneuvers. We eased forward, the gravel crunching under the Kenworth's weight. The truck moved like a force married to inertia. There's a dignity to that kind of weight, as if the machine itself refuses to hurry when it has a job. I could feel the momentum building in a way that's almost meditative if you're used to it, a slow, unstoppable pulse. The Tesla sat there glossy and unperturbed. I hit the air horn twice, sharp, polite blasts. No one came. I shifted to a lower gear and inched the truck forward, every inch of movement deliberate. My cameras recorded in close-up the Tesla's rear bumper, the light reflecting in its chrome trim the way a stray leaf drifted across its hood. My front camera caught Pete's hands on the wheel, tense but controlled. My backup feed logged the distance between the truck and the gate. Everything was documented, sound, sight, sequence. If someone tried to paint what happened as reckless, the footage would say otherwise. At 0607, the Kenworth's bumper kissed the Tesla's rear bumper, an almost tender first contact that in any other situation would be a fender bender and a dashed morning. Karen still didn't appear. I tapped the mic again. "Pete, we're going to push slowly. Keep it steady." The world narrowed. The only sounds were the diesel hum, the subtle groan of the loaded suspension, and the tiny chirp of a neighbor's security camera somewhere down the lane. In slow motion, because memory makes slow motion of things that matter, the bumper compressed metal surrendered, and then a sound like a small apocalypse filled the air, metal tearing, plastic popping, glass spitting like rain. The Tesla's rear folded inward as if someone had sat a heavy hand on it and squeezed. Adrenaline moved through me in an efficient way. I didn't feel rage so much as the cold clarity of someone who had chosen a path and was seeing it through to the end. Pete eased the truck forward another foot. The rear axle of the Tesla dug into the dirt. Its suspension collapsed with a soft, terrible thunk. A high note of a horn from a neighbor's car somewhere down the road added an absurd soundtrack to the moment. Karen came running from the clubhouse like a woman cut from silk and stitched into panic. Her hair was wild, sunglasses askew, and she screamed an animal, a human wail mingled with indignation. People spilled into yards, phones in hand, live streams, starting in half a dozen directions. A chorus of voices swelled. "What the hell, oh my God, call the police." There was the immediate dizzying split between spectacle and law, people reacting to the crash cameras, catching the raw, unfolding scene, while the legal facts sat in tidy boxes on my desk. I climbed down from the Kenworth and walked deliberately to the Tesla. Karen stood by its passenger window, pounding it with her fists, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. She looked at me as if I'd personally plucked the vehicle from a showroom and tossed it into a crusher. Every indignation she had was packed into those animal sounds. "You can't do this," she shrieked. You'll pay for this. I held up my hand and spoke loud enough for the cameras and the crowd and the deputy who'd just pulled up in his cruiser to hear. Karen, I said, voice level, you were warned. Certified letter, posted signs, public notice, everything. You chose to park on private property after every notice. I called you. I called the sheriff. We gave you every chance. She babbled about rights and lawyers and damage and television. The deputy looked through the cloud feed on my phone, scrolling through timestamps like a doctor flipping patient charts. He closed his mouth, meeting my eyes. Sir, he said to me, we documented the warnings. She was notified. This is complicated, but the facts are the facts. Karen's calls to her insurance company were immediate and furious, yelling about theft, vandalism, assault. Her husband arrived somewhere in the middle of her tirade, breathless, flustered, insisting he'd been at an appointment and couldn't possibly have known. Neighbors gathered, some with sympathetic faces toward Karen, others with looks of dawning comprehension. Someone from the HOA arrived and stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, eyes flicking between the mangled Tesla and the neat stack of certified mail receipts someone had handed them. I let the cameras roll. I answered questions with the precise, damped voice of a man who had covered his tracks cleanly. We gave notice, I said to a local reporter, who elbowed forward. This was business on private land. We proceeded after proper warnings. Karen's meltdown crescendoed, screaming into a phone, then collapsing onto the hood of her destroyed car, as if the metal itself had betrayed her trust. Her followers posted snippets online within minutes, shaky videos with breathless commentary, slow pans of crushed aluminum, a woman in tears, a monster in a hard hat. The internet would pick this apart in hours, but the record, my record, was immaculate. Time-stamped video, certified mail, posted signs, witness statements, a manifest in the Kenworth's glove box. As deputies took witness statements and cataloged the wreckage, a kind of stunned hush settled on the cul-de-sac. The air smelled of diesel and crushed metal and something like possibility, people whispered. An elderly neighbor I'd once cut wood for walked up and put a hand on my arm. Good on you for being patient, she said softly. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd run the ledger and found the balance kept, hard-won, calculated, and utterly final. I recorded one last clip on my phone before the deputy asked me to step aside for formal questioning. I looked straight into the lens and said, for anyone watching later, next time read the sign. Then I turned to face the swarm of microphones, the officer's clipboard, Karen's wails, and the steady blinking of the security cameras, everything that would carry the rest of the story into the light. You can tell when someone's entire illusion of power cracks. It doesn't happen in a scream, it happens in the silence afterward. That morning, once the diesel fumes faded, and the sheriff's deputy started writing his report, that silence hung heavy in the air. The HOA members stood frozen in the street, clutching their phones like crucifixes, unsure if they should comfort Karen or film her. I just stood near my gate, hands in my pockets, feeling like I'd finally taken back something she'd stolen from me months ago, my peace. Karen's white Tesla looked like a crushed soda can. The rear half was folded, the tailgate split open, battery fluids leaking into the dirt. The hood, once her pride and joy, had been warped and twisted until the T logo looked like a crooked grin. The deputy's pen scratched slowly across the paper. Mr. Turner, he said, voice steady. I've confirmed you gave notice, multiple notices, including a certified letter, visible signage, and verbal warnings. You also notified my office this morning before operations began. Yes, sir, I said. He nodded toward the mangled car. This will be recorded as a civil incident resulting from trespass on private property. No criminal charges are pending. That last sentence hit Karen like a bullet. She'd been standing off to the side, muttering about malicious destruction, but the deputy's tone made it clear the show was over. What? She shrieked, storming toward him. You're just going to let him get away with this? He destroyed my property. The deputy didn't flinch. Ma'am, your car was illegally parked on land you do not own. He provided multiple warnings in writing and verbally. You were explicitly told that commercial vehicles would be using the road today. I don't care, she screamed, face flushed red. I'm HOA vice president. I represent this community. The deputy raised an eyebrow. Not on this road you don't. That one line should have gone on a t-shirt. Karen's husband Doug arrived right then, still in his pajama pants socks, half on, clutching his briefcase like it was going to save him. He looked at the Tesla, then at Karen, then at me. Honey, what did you do? What did I do? She howled. He crushed my car with a logging truck. Doug looked at the deputy, who simply showed him the evidence copies of the letters, photographs of the posted signs, time-stamped video from my security feed. The poor man just sagged. Brenda, he muttered, using her real name, a sign that even he'd dropped the act. "You didn't read any of this, did you?" Karen's voice cracked. "I didn't think he'd actually. That's the problem." I cut in quietly but clearly. "You didn't think." The cameras caught that line, and within hours it was everywhere. By mid-afternoon, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Apparently, they were more terrified of liability than of Karen's wrath. The community Facebook page exploded. Some residents defended her. "Marcus is a bully, this is too far," but others started sharing screenshots of her past violation, notices the fake fines, even clips of her blocking my gate. The narrative turned fast. By evening, the video titled "HOA Karen Gets Her Tesla Crushed by Logging Truck Justice Served" hit the internet. It had been posted by one of the teenagers from down the street. The kid even added dramatic music. It went viral overnight. I didn't ask for fame, but fame found me anyway. Local news showed up by noon the next day, filming the tire marks, the flattened Tesla, the private road signs, still shining proudly in the Sunday. They interviewed neighbors. Some acted shocked. Others smiled behind their polite expressions. One woman whispered to a reporter, "Honestly, she deserved it." Karen, meanwhile, went nuclear. She called her insurance company demanding full coverage. The adjuster came out, took one look at the car, checked my documentation, and said, "Sorry, ma'am, this falls under negligence. You were warned repeatedly." She screamed at him, too. Then she called a lawyer, a real one this time, not Doug, and tried to sue me for property destruction. The attorney, after reviewing the evidence, told her point blank, "You have no case. In fact, if you push this, you could be countersued for harassment, fraud, and trespassing." When that news hit, Karen's world began collapsing. The HOA, desperate to save face, held another meeting, this one public. Half the neighborhood showed up. Someone read aloud my certified letter. Someone else pulled up her fake HOA fines on their phone. Every skeleton she'd stuffed into that pastel-colored Tesla came rattling out. It turned out she'd been charging neighbors administrative fees, that she pocketed falsifying aesthetic violation tickets, and even using HOA funds to pay for her yoga classes. I wasn't even there. I didn't need to be. Her empire was eating itself alive. Doug tried to keep his head down, but gossip travels fast. By Friday, he was packing boxes. Karen stood in her driveway shouting at him about betrayal, while movers pretended not to hear. It would have been sad if it weren't so poetic. The same week, the sheriff's department released a short public statement. After reviewing evidence provided by both parties, no criminal wrongdoing was found in the incident at Whispering Pines. "The matter has been settled civilly. That was it. Case closed." The HOA board sent me an email 3 days later. They didn't apologize directly, people like that rarely do, but they included the phrase, "We recognize your right to maintain access to your private property." I printed it and framed it in my office. As for Karen, the viral video destroyed her reputation faster than my truck had destroyed her car. People turned her name into a meme. "Don't pull a Karen" became shorthand for ignoring boundaries. She deactivated her social media, but it was too late. The internet remembers everything. Neighbors who had once avoided me began stopping by to talk again. One brought a pie. Another offered to help repaint my mailbox. Even the HOA president, a mild man named Henry, knocked on my door one afternoon and said, "I never liked how she ran things, Marcus. I'm sorry it took all this for everyone to see what she really was." I shook his hand and said, "Better late than never." By the following week, the HOA board voted to remove her permanently. She showed up at the meeting to protest, but no one wanted to hear her anymore. Her voice, once booming and bossy, just sounded tired. The funniest part, 2 days later, a used car dealer towed away the Tesla carcass and posted a listing online. "Slight damage, runs great. One previous owner, emotional mileage may vary." I laughed harder at that than I had in months. When her insurance claim officially closed, denied due to owner negligence, she tried one last stunt, a local TV interview. But when the reporter asked, "Do you admit you were parked on private property?" after receiving multiple warnings, she just froze, blinked twice, and mumbled, "I'd rather not discuss that." The segment aired once. Public sympathy was non-existent. That weekend, peace finally settled over Whispering Pines. The air smelled like pine resin again instead of tension. For the first time in months, no cars blocked my gate. I cleaned the gravel, repainted the gateposts, and replaced the dented latch. My new sign read, "Private road, respect gets you further than arrogance." That line made the local paper. I thought it was over, and in the big sense it was. But the best twist came 2 weeks later in a thick white envelope from Heritage Mutual Insurance Company. They wanted clarification on liability, a final review before closing their file. They asked for documentation supporting your lawful operation at the time of the incident. I smiled. I sent them a USB drive labeled Full Documentation, Turner Logging Case. Inside 67 pages of photos, 13 video clips, 6 witness statements, 2 copies of certified mail, and a notarized timeline. A week later, they sent back a letter that read, "Dear Mr. Turner, upon review of the evidence, we find no liability on your part. The claim is hereby denied, and the case is considered closed. Thank you for your thorough cooperation." It was the most satisfying paragraph I'd read in years. Karen stopped showing her face around town. Word spread that she'd put her house up for sale and was looking for a new start. No one bothered to wish her luck. Justice had already wished her goodbye. The quiet after chaos is a strange thing. It doesn't come with fanfare or fireworks. It seeps in slowly, like the sound of wind returning after a storm has passed. That's how it felt in the weeks that followed the Tesla incident. The air around my property was finally still again. No more cameras, no more shouting, no more pastel-colored SUVs blocking my gate like trophies of arrogance. Just the steady hum of cicadas, the crunch of gravel under my boots, and the deep familiar rhythm of peace. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been carrying until it was gone. For months, every drive home had been a coin toss. Would my gate be blocked today? Would there be another fake fine stuck to my mailbox? Another note scrawled in self-righteous ink? Now when I turned down my private road, the only thing waiting for me was the smell of pine sap and sawdust. Karen Patterson had vanished. After the viral storm, she'd stopped showing her face around Whispering Pines altogether. The HOA board had quietly voted her out, stripping her of her title, her decorative parking privileges, and her tiny empire of fines and forms. Her husband, Doug, had moved out first, no surprise there. Word through the grapevines said he'd rented an apartment in town and filed for separation. By the time the for sale sign appeared in front of their house, even the gossipers had run out of new material. I drove by once about a week after the sign went up. Out of curiosity, not pettiness. The yard, once trimmed to within an inch of its life, had started to wilt. The flower beds were patchy, the mailbox leaned slightly, and someone had removed the HOA vice president plaque from the front porch. The empty driveway looked oddly poetic, like a stage after the actors had left. A few neighbors caught my eye as I drove past. They waved. Genuine, warm, guilt-tinged waves, the kind people give when they finally realize they'd been fooled. I nodded back, no hard feelings. Most of them had been scared of Karen more than anything else. She'd ruled the HOA like a petty dictator with a clipboard. Now that she was gone, the community felt lighter, freer. One afternoon, the new HOA president, Henry the mild-mannered accountant who'd once apologized to me for the misunderstanding, stopped by my property. He stood there on the gravel, hat in hand, and said, "Marcus, on behalf of the board, I just wanted to apologize formally. We let her overstep. It won't happen again." I looked at him for a long moment and finally smiled. "Apology accepted. You folks take care of your side of the line, and I'll take care of mine." He grinned. "That's fair enough." Later that evening, I stood by my rebuilt gate and thought about how something as small as a parking spot had spiraled into months of insanity, fines, fraud, and the total collapse of a woman's social empire. It was ridiculous, but also revealing. Some people treat boundaries like suggestions. They think rules apply to everyone but them. Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was a lesson in what happens when entitlement meets consequences. I spent the next few weeks restoring my property, repainting the gate, replacing the dented post. I even added a little plaque I'd ordered from a metalworker in town. It read in brushed bronze letters, "Private property, respect it or regret it." It gleamed under the sunlight like a moral written in metal. Around Thanksgiving, my mother came to visit again. The last time she'd been here, she'd sat in her car for hours waiting for a tow truck that never came. This time, the road was clear, the gate opened smoothly, and she parked right up front without a single obstacle. When she stepped out, she looked around and smiled relief, softening her face. "Well," she said, adjusting her scarf, "it's nice to see the Queen has abdicated." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the pie I was carrying. "Yeah, Mom, peace has been restored to the kingdom." She patted my arm. "You did good, Marcus. You stayed patient. You did it the right way." That part meant the most to me, the right way, because as tempting as it had been to lose my temper, I hadn't. I'd done everything by the book. That was the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge feels good for a moment. Justice lasts. A few days later, I received one final letter from Heritage Mutual Insurance. It was short and satisfying, the bureaucratic equivalent of a full stop. Case officially closed. Claimant found fully liable for her own losses. No further action required. I pinned it to my bulletin board next to a photo of my first logging truck. Every scar on that old machine had a story behind it, and now so did my gate. The following spring, a young couple moved into Karen's old house. They drove a pickup truck and waved the first day they saw me. A week later, the man came over with a six-pack of beer and said, "Hey neighbor, I heard there used to be some drama around here." I smiled, cracked open a bottle and said, "You could say that, but don't worry, the drama moved out months ago." We laughed, and that was that. Normalcy at last. Sometimes I still get emails from people who saw the video online. Strangers from across the country writing things like, "Man, that was the most satisfying story I've ever seen," or "You're a hero for standing up to HOA bullies." I always reply the same way, "Thanks." But the real hero was paperwork. Because that's the truth. The whole thing didn't end with a truck or a crash. It ended with documentation, patience, and proof. That's what beats entitlement. Not shouting matches. Not threats. Just quiet, stubborn evidence that refuses to bend. As I sit here now looking out over my land, the pines swaying the gravel, clean the gate strong, I can't help but think about what this whole mess taught me. People will test you. They'll cross your lines, poke your patience, and try to make you feel small. The trick isn't to outscream them. It's to outlast them with calm, with facts, with time. Karen thought her title and her Tesla made her untouchable. What she didn't understand was that law and respect weigh more than any badge or brand. I didn't crush her car out of anger. I crushed the arrogance that said she could do whatever she wanted and never face the consequences. Sometimes consequences just happen to weigh 80,000 pounds. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that boundaries aren't just physical, they're moral. People like Karen don't respect fences, gates, or signs because they don't respect the quiet dignity of other people's space. And when someone like that keeps pushing, it's tempting to push back in anger. But that only gives them what they want: attention, chaos, validation. The real power is in restraint, in documentation, in doing it right, even when doing it right takes months. Because the moment you let anger guide you, you hand over the moral high ground. Life will always throw you a few Karens, people who test your patience, twist your words, and try to take advantage of your decency. Let them show you who they are. Then respond with proof, not rage. At the end of the day, justice doesn't need volume. It needs patience, timing, and a solid paper trail. So if someone keeps crossing your line, don't fight them in the mud. Build your line in stone. And when they trip over it, let the weight of their own choices do the rest. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor like this, tell me your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next time karma rolls through the neighborhood, you'll want to see it coming.